The door to my quarters was already open when I got there, and that alone should have told me something was wrong. I had just finished a 16-hour shift monitoring the relay drift on Meridian Station, the kind of shift that leaves your eyes burning and your thoughts slow, and all I wanted was to fall into my own bed and sleep for 10 hours straight. Instead, I found the door standing open, the lights inside already on, and a shape lying under my blanket that was far too tall to be human. I stopped in the hallway and stared. My hand was still on the frame of the door, my bag still hanging off my shoulder, and for a moment, I genuinely thought I had walked into the wrong unit, but no. There was my jacket on the hook. There was my boots by the wall. There was the small photo of my dog sitting on the nightstand, except now it had been pushed to one side to make room for a tall glass of water that was not mine. The figure under the blanket had silver skin, and pale silver hair spread across my pillow, and even half asleep, I recognized her immediately. Everyone on this station recognized her. She was Severin, senior attaché of the Cthulhu delegation, the same delegation that had arrived 3 weeks earlier to negotiate mining rights along the outer belt. I had seen her before in the station's public halls, moving with the kind of calm confidence that made everyone else step aside without being asked. I had worked on Meridian Station for almost 3 years by then, first as a junior technician and later as the person trusted to watch the relay drift alone on the long night shifts. It was not glamorous work. Most days it meant staring at columns of numbers, waiting for a signal to wander out of range so I could nudge it back before anyone higher up noticed a problem. I liked the quiet of it. I liked coming home to a small, ordinary room that belonged entirely to me, a place with no politics and no negotiations, only a bed, a blanket, and a photo of a dog I had left behind on a distant world I still missed more than I let myself admit. That quiet was the whole reason I had chosen this posting in the first place, and it was the exact thing that felt suddenly, completely gone the moment I saw her lying there. Now she was in my bed, sound asleep, wrapped in my blanket like she had lived there her whole life. I cleared my throat. Nothing happened. I cleared it again, louder this time. One eye opened, silver and unblinking, and looked at me the way someone looks at an insect that has wandered into a room it does not belong in. "You are standing in my private quarters," she said, her voice calm and even, as if she were the one who had walked in on a stranger. "No," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could manage. "You are lying in my bed. This is my unit. I have lived here for 2 years." She sat up slowly, unbothered, and looked around the room as though seeing it for the first time. This unit was listed as unoccupied guest quarters. I was informed by the station steward that it was available for the duration of the negotiations. "Then the station steward made a mistake," I said, "because there is a lock on that door tied to my biometric signature, and it does not open for guest quarters. It opens for me." For a moment she said nothing, simply studying me the way she might study a report that did not match the numbers she expected. I could see the calculation behind her eyes, the same calculation I imagine every diplomat learns early in their career, the quiet process of deciding whether a mistake is worth defending or worth quietly correcting. I did not wait for her to decide. I walked to the panel beside the door and pulled up the unit's access log, the same log every quarters kept for 2 years, tied not just to entry times but to a dozen small personal details that had synced without my ever noticing. 2 years of my comings and goings, my name at the top, my face in the corner. Even a note about my dog's last checkup, because the system apparently thought that was worth remembering too. I turned the screen toward her. "This is my unit," I said again. "It has been my unit for 2 years. Nobody flagged it as guest quarters, because it was never guest quarters." She looked at the screen for a long moment, and something in her posture changed, just slightly, the calm confidence replaced by something more careful. "This is a clerical error," she said. "I will have my aide correct the listing with the steward." "That's not the part that worries me," I said. "The part that worries me is that this door did not simply unlock because someone at the front desk gave you the wrong room number. This door is biometric. It only opens for the codes it recognizes. For you to be lying in my bed right now, something had to override that lock directly." I watched her go very still. Diplomatic override codes exist for real emergencies, for moments when someone with proper authority needs access to a restricted area for a genuine reason, not for a tired diplomat who wanted a nap after a long day of negotiations. Using one to walk into a private human residence was not a clerical error. It was the kind of thing that ended up in official reports, the kind of thing that oversight committees back home spent entire afternoons discussing, deciding whether someone's conduct reflected poorly on an entire delegation. "You are suggesting I used a diplomatic override on private civilian quarters," she said slowly, each word placed with the same careful weight of someone recalculating a sentence they had already begun. I'm suggesting that the door was locked. I never gave anyone permission to enter, and yet here you are, I said. I'll let you draw your own conclusion. For the first time since I had walked in, she looked less like a diplomat delivering a lecture and more like a person doing quiet, uncomfortable math. Whatever confidence had carried her through weeks of negotiations with admirals and department heads did not seem to carry the same weight in a small residential unit with a photo of a dog on the nightstand. Before either of us could say anything else, the comm panel by the door chimed, and a voice I recognized as station security crackled through. "We've received a report of unauthorized access on Deck 4, the voice said, requesting confirmation of resident status. I looked at her. She looked at me. Neither of us moved for a second. "I did not call security," I said quietly. "Neither did I," she said, and for the first time there was something uncertain in her voice, something that had not been there when she first opened her eyes and told me I was standing in her quarters. I answered the panel. "This is Daniel Price, resident of Unit 412. I'm here. Everything is fine." "Copy that," the voice said. "We're showing an override event logged 40 minutes ago on your unit's access panel. Just doing a routine check. No further action needed unless you report otherwise." The channel closed, and the quiet that followed felt heavier than before. 40 minutes ago, I repeated, looking at her. That's not a clerical error on the steward's side. That's a direct override, logged and time-stamped, tied to your credentials. She sat straighter, and for the first time she looked less like someone defending her position and more like someone trying to understand how she had ended up in this position at all. "I did not request an override," she said. "I was told the unit was assigned to me. I assumed the door simply opened because it recognized my clearance as a diplomat." "Diplomatic clearance doesn't open private residences," I said. "It opens conference rooms, restricted labs, secure communication channels, not someone's bedroom." She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her running through the same possibilities I was already turning over in my head. Either someone had made an honest mistake feeding her the wrong room assignment, or someone had deliberately routed her here, knowing exactly what would happen when a Cthulhu diplomat used an override code on a human's private quarters, and knowing exactly how that would look once it reached the wrong desk. "Who assigned you this unit?" I asked. "My aide," she said. "Corwin. He handles logistics for my stay." I did not know the name, but something about the way she said it, the small hesitation before she spoke, told me she was already wondering the same thing I was. A busy delegation with weeks of tense negotiations over mining rights did not make a mistake like this by accident. Someone benefited from a diplomat looking careless, entitled, and willing to bend rules that were not hers to bend, and whoever that was had picked a moment, and a room, that would guarantee a confrontation. "I need you to pull up your assignment message," I said. "The one that told you this unit was yours." She hesitated only a moment before doing exactly that, sliding a small device from the folds of her robe and tapping through it with quick, practiced movements. After a few seconds she turned it toward me, and I read the short message displayed there. It listed a unit number, 412, my unit, along with a note claiming it had been cleared for temporary diplomatic use during the negotiation period. "This message came from an internal station address," I said, reading the sender line twice to be sure. "Not from your aide, not from the steward's office either. This came from Station Logistics, a department that has no business assigning private residential units to anyone." She frowned, studying the message again as though seeing it clearly for the first time. "I assumed it came through proper channels," she said. "I did not think to question it." "That's the point," I said. "Whoever sent this knew you wouldn't question it. They knew a diplomat under pressure, exhausted after weeks of negotiations, would take an assignment at face value, and use an override without stopping to ask who actually approved it." For a long moment neither of us spoke. Outside, I could hear the low hum of the station's ventilation system, steady and constant, the same sound I fell asleep to every night, except tonight I was standing in my own doorway instead of lying in my own bed, working through a puzzle I had not expected to face after a 16-hour shift. "If this becomes a formal complaint," she said slowly, "it will not simply embarrass me. It could stall the entire negotiation. My delegation would be accused of disregarding human property rights during a sensitive diplomatic period. The mining rights discussion would collapse under the weight of it before it even reaches a final vote. And if it isn't reported," I said, "whoever set this up gets away with it, and they'll likely try something bigger next time, because it worked once." She looked at me with an expression I had not seen from her before, something less like authority and more like exhaustion, the kind that comes from realizing the ground beneath a negotiation is far less stable than it appears. "What do you suggest?" she asked, and there was no command left in her voice, only a real question. I thought about it for a moment. I was not a diplomat, and I was not station security. I was a technician who monitored relay signals for a living, someone who understood systems, timestamps, and logs far better than politics. But the answer, when it came to me, was simple enough that it did not require any political skill at all. We don't report a diplomat overstepping her bounds, I said. We report a security failure. Someone inside station logistics sent a false assignment message and enabled an unauthorized override on a private residence. That is not about you being careless. That is about a vulnerability in the system that could just as easily be used against your delegation, or against mine, or against anyone else on this station. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not with suspicion this time, but with the sharp focus of someone recognizing a way out of a problem that had seemed impossible only a moment earlier. That framing protects both of us, she said. It also gets to the truth, I said, which is that neither of us did anything wrong tonight, except trust a system that someone else deliberately broke. We spent the next 20 minutes pulling together everything we could. I gathered the access logs from my unit's panel, showing the exact time of the override and the credentials used to trigger it. She pulled the assignment message from her device, along with the sender address that clearly did not match any legitimate department authorized to allocate residential units. Together, the two pieces told a story that had nothing to do with entitlement or carelessness, and everything to do with someone trying to manufacture exactly the kind of incident that could derail weeks of careful negotiation. When station security arrived a second time, this time in person rather than over the comm panel, I laid out what we had found. The officer, a woman named Marissa Doyle who looked like she had seen every kind of strange incident this station had to offer, listened without interrupting, then pulled up the logistics department's outgoing message records on her own tablet. Doyle had a habit of tapping the edge of her tablet whenever she found something that did not add up, and she tapped it 3 times in quick succession while scrolling through the logistics records. Your override happened at exactly the same minute as a maintenance drone route change 3 decks below us, she said, glancing up at Severin. That's not a coincidence. Someone used the drone reroute as cover, hoping the 2 events would get logged together and buried under routine maintenance traffic before anyone thought to separate them. That takes planning, Severin said quietly, not a moment of carelessness. Someone wanted this exact outcome. Someone wanted a diplomat caught somewhere she shouldn't be, at a time when a resident would be coming home tired and angry enough to make it loud, Doyle said. Whoever set this up studied both of your schedules first. That's the part that worries me most. I felt a small chill at that. The realization that this had never been random at all. That somewhere behind the scenes, someone had watched my shift schedule closely enough to know exactly when I would walk through that door and find her there. There's no record of this message originating from logistics, she said after a moment, frowning at her screen. It was spoofed to look like it came from them. Spoofed by whom? Severin asked, and for the first time there was an edge of real concern in her voice, not for herself, but for what this meant about the negotiations she had spent weeks working toward. That's what we're going to find out, Doyle said. But whoever did this wanted a diplomat and a station resident at each other's throats tonight, probably hoping it would turn into exactly the kind of formal complaint that ends up delaying your mining talks. Might be someone on either side who doesn't want this deal to happen at all. I looked at Severin, and for a moment neither of us said anything. Whatever tension had filled the room when I first walked in and found her asleep in my bed had shifted into something else entirely. Something closer to 2 people who had just avoided walking into the same trap together. I owe you an apology, she said finally, turning to face me directly. I dismissed you as beneath my attention the moment I saw you standing in the doorway. I assumed a station laborer would not understand the weight of diplomatic matters. I was wrong. You understood the situation better than I did. You don't owe me an apology, I said. You owe yourself a little more caution before you trust an assignment message without checking where it actually came from. But for what it's worth, most people in your position would have kept insisting the room was theirs even after I showed them 2 years of access logs. You didn't. That counts for something. She studied me for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, something like a smile touched the corner of her mouth. Perhaps station laborers understand diplomacy better than diplomats do, she said. Or maybe we just understand systems, I said. Diplomacy is a system too. It just runs on trust instead of code, and someone tried to hack both tonight. Doyle spent the next hour tracing the spoofed message back through the station's internal network, and by the time the investigation wrapped for the night, it was clear the attempt had come from a junior aide within the mining consortium itself, someone who stood to profit if the negotiations collapsed and the rights went to a different bidder entirely. It was a small, quiet motive behind what could have become a very loud, very public diplomatic incident, and it never would have come to light if either of us had simply reacted the way the aide had hoped, with anger, accusations, and a formal complaint filed in the heat of the moment. Severin left my unit that night with a quiet nod instead of the cold dismissal she had greeted me with hours earlier. The negotiations continued the following week without disruption, and the mining rights agreement was finalized not long after, this time with a few additional clauses about verified communication channels between departments, put in place specifically because of what had happened that night. I never expected to end up in the middle of a diplomatic near disaster after a 16-hour shift. I certainly never expected to find a Cthulhu attaché asleep in my bed, wrapped in my blanket, resting her head on my pillow like she owned the place. But somewhere between the confrontation, the access logs, and the quiet hour we spent working through the evidence together, I learned something that stuck with me long after that night ended. It is easy to assume the worst about someone the moment they overstep a boundary that matters to you. It is much harder, and far more useful, to stop and ask why the boundary was crossed in the first place. Severin could have insisted the room was hers until security dragged her out. I could have filed a complaint the second I saw her stir under my blanket. Either choice would have handed a quiet victory to whoever had set the whole thing in motion, someone counting on exactly that kind of anger to do their work for them. Instead, we asked questions, we checked records, and we found the truth hiding just beneath the surface of what had looked, at first glance, like nothing more than a rude diplomat claiming a bed that was never hers to take. These days, when Severin passes me in the station's public corridors, she gives a small nod, the kind reserved for someone she now considers an equal, rather than someone beneath her notice. I still monitor relay signals for a living, and she still negotiates mining rights across star systems, and neither of us expected that a strange, tense night in my quarters would turn into something like mutual respect. But it did, and every time I walk past my own bed now, I glance at the small photo of my dog on the nightstand, back in its rightful place. And I remember that sometimes the most important thing you can do in a tense moment is not to raise your voice, but to ask, calmly and clearly, who actually benefits from you losing your temper.